Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Julio Godinez, and welcome to today's Devops.com webinar, Better Testing with Fewer, Smarter Tests, brought to you by Launchable Inc. We have a great webinar for you today, but before we get started, I just need to go through some quick housekeeping announcements. First, today's event is being recorded, so if you missed any part of the webinar, you'll be able to access the recording for on-demand viewing. We will be sending out a link to access the webinar on demand, or you can simply visit devops.com/webinars. We want to hear from you, so please feel free to send in your questions at any time throughout the program by using the Q&A tab. We also encourage discussion by using the chat tab, so let us know your thoughts or just say a quick hello. Also, if you look in the handout section, you'll find a PDF of the Pulse Meter report that you can read at your own leisure. And finally, stick around until the end because we are doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so stay tuned to see if you're a winner. Joining me today is Dan Kirsch, Principal Analyst and Managing Director, TechStrong Research, and Harpreet Singh, Founder and Co-CEO of Launchable Inc. And with that, I'm going to put myself on mute, turn off my camera, and hand the program over to Dan.
Thanks, Julio. So today as Julio mentioned, I'm Dan Kirsch, Principal Analyst and Managing Director with TechStrong Research. We're an industry analyst and research company. And today we're going to be talking about a pulse meter report. It was a series of flash polls that we conducted during this month, April 2022, amongst our members. And our members are an audience that's interested in cloud native development, cloud security, digital transformation. And let me introduce Harpreet. Go ahead, Harpreet.
Hi, very nice to be here. I'm the co-CEO and co-founder at Launchable Inc. In my past life, I was at Atlassian heading their Bitbucket cloud product. And before that, I was the VP of products at CloudBees, which is one of the leading Devops companies. So glad to be here.
Great. And as Julio mentioned, there's a handout available. It's a PDF of the full report. So during this conversation, Harpreet and I will talk about a few of the different data points found in the report. But if you want to look at it all, feel free to hit the handouts tab and download the report. We'll also be emailing it to everyone who's on the webinar. Let's jump in here. So I didn't warn Harpreet about this, but I grabbed this graphic off of Launchable's website. And I love it because it explains the problem of testing so clearly. I actually shared it with some folks on our market who aren't overly familiar with testing, and once I showed them this, they understood the problem right away. So the boss is saying, get back to work, and the developers are saying it's work in progress. Our work is being tested, and the boss says, "Oh, okay, then keep goofing off." So one thing we wanted to drill down on is how much productivity is lost towards testing. So the question we asked is how much productivity is lost from developers waiting on test execution, and about a third of folks said 0 to 25%. So that's great, but we have a huge number, almost 75%, said somewhere between 26% and 100% of productivity is lost waiting on test execution, which I thought, I always sort of knew as a gut instinct that there was a lot of productivity loss, but I was surprised by this number. What do you think, Harpreet?
Yeah, so first of all, on that graphic, I think the credit is due to our investor at 645 Ventures, Alicio. When we pitched this problem and he wrote this document, and I saw that graphic, and I was like, how did I not actually think about creating that myself? Like, this really, really clear defines that. Now, coming back to this, the question itself, it's actually quite surprising to me in the sense, like, I would have thought that most people are in the 20 to 25% range. I had a sense that there are like organizations that are in and around 50%, but to see that more than 75% of people are talking about their productivity loss is greater than 25% is phenomenal. This actually brings one story from a customer interview that we did. So this is a car company. It's one of the top 5 car companies. They're using us, their case studies on our website. And they brought us in, and I ended up interviewing their dev team and their dev leader. And this lady, who's their team lead, I asked them, like, what is the productivity loss for your team while you're waiting on tests and waiting on, bills to turn green? And the data point actually masks the frustration behind. So she described this scenario where, they push changes in and they find that their tests are not completely run. So they go back home, they get their kids food, they put them to bed, and then at 9 p.m. they come back and log on, right? And you know the story now. Pretty much every sort of dev out there logs in after like 9 p.m. And she's like, I go in and look at the tests. If it is green, fantastic. Like I just wasted like 2 hours of my night. But if it is red, I'm going to do this whole thing tomorrow again. So I asked her to encapsulate like what emotion that it brought on, and she talked about like it's just sheer anger at the amount of hours that are wasted, and somebody else on the team said like it's sheer frustration. So it like this number masks the anger and frustration behind that people feel while like they're just waiting, and think about what it does for their developer experience. It's like it's just really a bad life.
Yeah, so I think it comes to there's so much written about sort of the Great Resignation. People are rethinking their jobs and really want to. You touched on developer experience, and I'm thinking about culture, and developers really want to be part of the team and make the company better, and not just order takers and checking boxes. So you want to talk about
Exactly. Yeah. So like this is another story that comes to my mind. This is like a Silicon Valley, one of the top companies in the world. It's pretty big. They're into containers, and their VP of engineering was talking to me, and the reason they were talking to us was developer experience was on top of their mind, right? And I asked him what that actually meant. It's like because it takes like 3 or 4 days. I think it was like 5 commits before something got pushed into was sort of tick mark green, and it took a couple of days. So you're taking like a developer, and one push from the developer sort of goes through this pipeline of testing and so on, and for a couple of days, and then they have to do it about 3 or 4 times. So think about the wastage, and this is a complex system, right? It's not one of those hobby systems that we are talking about. So there's a lot of complexity involved here. So he's talking about this developer experience really sucks, and then people leave, and he's then responsible to bring somebody else on, and it takes them 4 to 6 months before that person is productive. So that shitty developer experience, sorry for that word, but that developer experience is costing the organization such a huge thing in terms of like hiring, right? And then bringing them on, and like how it is. Try going out and hiring a developer in today's world. It is a brutal world out there, right? And if you lose somebody because they are unhappy with developer experience, sorry, it all comes back to the leadership and like not providing the right environment for the team.
Yeah, I was meeting with some CIOs last week, and the idea came up. We talk about people, process, and technology all the time, but it's really,
Mm-hmm.
but then we were talking about people, process, and culture, where it really comes down to a culture of treating people well, of making sure everyone is contributing and not just wasting time, and then of course technology is important also.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, your thing is reminding me of a Stripe report that came out in 2017 or 19, one of those years. And, they were asking about their developer experience. And the way Stripe said is like in a 42-hour work week, that's how they placed this. about 35 hours a week devs are spending on bad code, right? And what that actually means for me is like you're trying to push some code in, you run the tests, you figure out something went wrong, then you're trying to fix that. Now all that is great, in terms of if everything is moving smoothly, but you're grappling with sort of these issues for like 3/4 of your week. And for them, like they actually tied it to like what is the global GDP loss, which fascinates me. It's like they pinned it at like $85 billion wasted a year because people are waiting on bad code, right? And so you go back to some organizations and you talk to them, and it's like, that graphic that you showed, I'm testing and they're playing something. It's not the sword fight that's happening. You're actually in a meeting somewhere trying to fill this, fill the next hour because your stuff is being tested and you think you're being productive, but really what's happened is you just found meetings as an equivalent to your sword fight to go kind of do something else, right?
Yeah, sometimes teams think they're being productive, but they're really just waiting on a number of other checkboxes.
Exactly.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
And then the I know we're going to talk about it in a little bit, but it's always, some people are just searching for more and more data. That's the cure-all, but in some cases, that creates more problems because you're creating data that's not necessarily useful.
Right. Yeah. So, and, I think we're going to jump into it, but like when I think about, as we were thinking about Launchable, one of the things we came to this conclusion was like, what's happening is there's a tsunami of data that's being generated, right? And I'm just now talking your DevOps pipeline, not even talking about the rest of the world, right? You're running your tests, you're running your, hundreds of times a day. You are running sort of tests across different platforms. Maybe it's Selenium, maybe it's Cypress, and so on and so forth. And all that is generating data. And is that data being used? Unlikely. It's kind of falling by the wayside. And the more number of platforms you're thinking about, the more number of tests you need to run. And so for us, the question was like, okay, how do we look at this problem differently, right? Um, uh, what are the key questions that data would let us answer that makes the developer experience better?
So let's dive into the next data point. So we talked about the idea that developers are losing a lot of time waiting for testing. So what's the approach? What are companies doing today? And so we asked participants, what optimization or efficiency practices have you adopted around automated testing? So we've got about 40% are doing parallelized testing, a third are moving testing to the cloud, 1 in 5 dependency analysis, and a small group, about 8%, are using AI and ML for things like predictive test selection. And
Yeah.
let's start with the top, but then let's drill into this predictive test selection. I'm not sure if everyone on the webinar knows what predictive test selection is, but let's talk about it. Let's talk about the title of the webinar: Better Testing with Fewer Smarter Tests. So that segues in nicely with this data.
Yeah. So the way I think about this is, if you think about the spectrum of the kinds of things you can do to make your life better, right? And you're trying to essentially what we are trying to do is push more features out with the lowest risk possible. That's really what we are trying to do, right? And the journey really starts with automation. So if you don't have tests that are automated, you are in a whole different category. So let's keep that aside. And once you've automated the test, then you kind of come to like 3 or 4 approaches. So approach one is what people start looking at it is like, maybe we should parallelize these tests and go figure out like, can we use more compute resources to run them in parallel, try to like, put them in buckets and make these buckets, granular enough, if that's the right word, and reduce say a 2-hour runtime to a 1-hour runtime. So they end up doing that. Then along the way, somewhere here, depending on your organization's maturity, you decide that that was not quite doing it for us. We don't quite have as many machines that we need. Maybe we should be on the cloud, or you're already on the cloud and you're on the journey of moving your stuff onto the cloud. And then you try to use the more compute resources that the cloud kind of gets you and parallelize that more. Maybe you get down from that 2 to 1 hour to say 45 minutes. And then at some point you realize that I parallelize this as much as I can. What can I do now, right? I cannot reduce that 45-minute run down further, right? So what do I do now? And then you have like some options. And like I think there's a paper out there by Shopify engineering that talks about like how they use dependency analysis. So what they're doing is they're looking at the code, they're doing dependency analysis of the code, and then selecting the tests that need to be run. And you potentially now move that 45-minute to like 30 minutes, right? So that's an approach. We had like customers who've kind of done that. But what ends up happening here is that approach kind of doesn't scale. So in this particular customer who came to us, they built this dependency analysis thing, but that's very language dependent, and it doesn't quite scale across the organization. So for example, and we, for example, we know that every organization is just heterogeneous, right? You have so many languages out there, and you built a language specific solution. You now have to go build another language specific solution. So that's where some organizations, I would call these enlightened organization, hit a wall. Now,
So one question I had, or one thought I have. So if we look at these, the first three options, you're really doing the same. It's the same approach. You're just doing it more, or you're doing the same test. You're just doing it more efficiently, faster, at the same time. But you're doing the same actions, just in a better, more automated way. Is that a right way of
I
thinking?
think all of them actually fall in that category. So if all you're trying to figure out, maybe not actually. So the
But I was
first two
thinking
are
of
in the same
predictive.
category.
Yeah, because I was thinking predictive test selection. You're looking at all of the actions you're doing and saying what actually is bringing actionable results. Where the other ones you're doing everything, whether it's a test that's meaningless or not.
Uh, it's not entirely correct. I think the first two, you're running all the tests that you can. Dependency analysis is using your code, static code analysis, to go find a subset of tests. So like I would sort of classify that along with predictive test selection. So they are like, um, both of them are asking the question like, can I actually cut down tests? And one approach is very language specific, while the other one is machine learning specific.
Okay, makes sense. So it's and do you think that order, this order sort of makes sense? And when you work with clients in terms of the maturity of the DevOps and testing organization, they're going to start with parallelized tests and
Yeah, I think
work their
so.
way up.
Yeah, I think so. That's what ends up happening is you start with parallelized tests. Maybe you might have moved to the cloud before, so they are interchangeable. Enlightened organizations try to say like, what can I do even further, right? This is like your, I guess, the Shopify's and the Googles of the world, which have like very expensive developer experience teams that are trying to go in and optimize the developer productivity and the developer experience, kind of can throw people at it, kind of go into the next phase, which is, the code analysis. Now, the just to call this out, the approach that we have is fairly new. So people don't quite know that you could do this with AI machine learning, right? So that's, one of the reasons why that number is 8% is like, it's a very new approach, right? So Facebook, for example, has a paper that says how they use predictive test selection to find the right set of tests and optimize that. So the way I think about this is like, this is a new approach, and what Launchable has done is like shrink wrap this approach and made it turnkey for rest of the organizations to use. Right. So
Yeah,
if we put ourselves like 3 years down the line, I hope that the predictive test selection number would be much, much higher.
that was exactly my next. If you're gonna start with predictive test selection, the Googles of the world and Facebooks, they've got data scientists who can create customized models for their development efforts. Not every data scientists don't grow on trees, and they come at a huge expense. So scratch is difficult for mere mortal companies who don't have nearly unlimited funding.
Yeah. Funny thing is, my wife actually heads hiring for AI at LinkedIn, and I know exactly the struggle that it is going out and finding data scientists. And then what you want to do when you find those data scientists is actually apply to the businesses that increase your top line, right? And sort of optimizing your development pipeline becomes the secondary cause, right? And I don't think it is practical that every team out there will have like data scientists looking at their pipeline and trying to use AI and machine learning to improve that. Right? Now, the beauty of I think AI and machine learning. So the way I think about somewhat deviating from this topic is like there's really two buckets where testing is being applied for AI and machine learning. So one bucket is I don't have enough tests. I need to generate tests. So you have lots of companies out there like the Mabel and the Mesmer and so on that are helping you generate these UI tests, right? And the class of problems that we are talking about is like I do have tests, but now they're slowing me down. Like, how do I optimize that? And that's where sort of all these four approaches come in. And I feel like predictive test selection is so unique that it can be applied in any order on any of these things. And you could just bring it in before you're paralyzed, or you could bring it in after you're paralyzed. Doesn't quite matter.
Yeah. So let's move to the last data point we're going to talk about, which is bringing ML and AI into your DevOps pipeline. And so what I thought was interesting about this is, you have a huge number of people saying that they're gonna bring ML and AI into their DevOps pipeline. Almost a third of people participating, and nearly 2/3 said it's on our roadmap. We're going to do it in the next either next year or the next 2 years. But I think we're still very early. I would challenge that first third who say that it's going to happen this year. Sort of in what level of ML and AI are they going to integrate into their DevOps pipeline? Is it just some basic reporting, or is it really technology that's going to change the way that they create software, test software, and is it going to result in meaningful results, or is it sort of a vendor-led? A vendor says, stuck an ML sticker on a product and said, "We're now machine learning," because it got them more visibility and raised more money. But is it truly machine learning?
Yeah. So I wish we had a follow-up question to this because I did not expect the number to be this high. So there are two ways to, so there's only one way to interpret that question for me at the moment, which is like your audience is fairly enlightened and fairly forward-looking audience. So kudos to getting those kinds of people in there because they are thought leaders and are looking ahead. So then my next question would have been like, what do you actually mean you are going to have ML and AI in your pipeline today? How are you actually going to bring that in? Because if I go back to 3 years back when we started the company, my first year was like people were like AI, ML, okay, explain that to me. And then my second year has been like, oh, everybody is doing AI and ML, and there's ML washing. So when we actually talk to product, we have to actually explain how this is actually AI and machine learning and so on. So luckily for us, the predictive test selection, this whole approach cannot be possible without machine learning. So we can fairly easily go in and talk about it. So the question is like,
yeah, and the way I generally look at, I've spent a lot of time looking at AI and ML and sort of this whole idea of augmented intelligence. So, which means that humans have huge capabilities in terms of understanding context and drawing conclusions on very separate things. Whereas machines can ingest massive amounts of data, they'll never forget them. they'll never forget it. They can move much faster than a human, and so it's an area that I've been focused on, and I think that's really where it's interesting from a DevOps perspective. How can you make developers be able to work with you're not automating developers and testers out of a job. Instead, you're making their life easier, and they're more efficient and effective, and they have more fun because they're spending time actually impacting the customer experience versus just chasing down test results and bugs and things like that.
Right, right. But I would be curious, like, so you're seeing this number high, and you, in your analyst role, are talking to other organizations who are doing AI and ML. What kind of approaches are you seeing in people's DevOps pipeline?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot is focused on testing because there's testing it's an age-old. Maybe people bully on testing a little bit, but it's either testing or security are both bottlenecks and slow down the development process. So sort of shifting those left, and the only way to really do that is through automation. And once you start automation, you need to have some sort of smart automation. But the way there's two ways that people are involving AI and ML. Some of it is sort of you build a product or a platform. You've already trained models based on generic data or data sets that you've created, and then you ship the product to customers, and the model never changes. It's been trained, and it's pretty good. Of course, there could be drift as a customer changes. It's not customized for that customer. It's more customized on third-party generic data. And then the other approach is you're shipping a system that ingests the customer's data. So you have a model, but that model's changing and being customized based on the customer's data. So that's sort of the way I break it down. And obviously, it's more it can be more challenging to train the model based on the customer's data, but it also obviously the results can be greater because it's actually using real data rather than fake.
Right. Yeah. So the way I internalize it, I think I spoke to this point earlier, is like, if I'm just thinking in the testing space, it really boils down to like, do I have enough tests? I don't. And then there's machine learning approaches to generate visual tests, and that space is much more baked than the space that we are in. We are a handful of people. I think there's unicorn companies that are doing that, which is like, I do have enough tests, and that's slowing my velocity down. And how do I be smarter about it? And that's where we sort of end up. So when I think about this survey question, I feel like a number of people are actually using one of those, products, and that's how they're bringing AI and machine learning in their pipeline.
So if we sort of cue in a little bit more on the the topic of the webinar, better testing with fewer smarter tests. How is Launchable going about doing that? A lot of times I like to think about how do you get a huge data set into the data that you really care about versus just it works, it's always on. Yeah. I don't need to know that the light is on if the light is on.
Right. So I'll probably do a short segue into explaining why we started Launchable.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So my co-founder is Kosuke Kawaguchi. He's the creator of Jenkins, right? And I actually built a business around Jenkins at CloudBees, right? And so in our roles in the last decade or so, we spent a lot of time helping people through quote unquote DevOps transformations. We got people to connect their pipelines, build these pipelines. In fact, I would like to say that we actually built the first pipeline product. That's how I think about it in the market. And that's where like you now hear DevOps pipelines. And what we realized was like, people were doing all of these automation. Now put yourself in this place of like the VP of engineering who's like spending incredible capital to get his people to build these pipelines so that they can deliver faster. And they are on like this 8 to 8 month to a year and a half journey doing that. And it's only at that point can you start seeing some velocity improvements. And then they go like, okay, I got some, but now what? Like it isn't really changing my world. And I think our key insight here was like the biggest bottleneck is, when you think about that infinity loop for DevOps, it makes it seem like it's so seamless. Once you connect it, everything is moving. And our insight was like the test part are like lopsided. Think of it as a punctured tire. Like it's a visual that sits on our website. So that's what is happening. You connect all of this and you have like so many tests that are slowing your delivery down. And now you can't really cut tests down. Like the last 20 years, you've been told, write more and more tests. We need more tests. We need more testing. And so our insight here was like, can we be smarter? And like the predictive test selection was an approach, right? So effectively, what predictive test selection does is it looks at your code changes coming in, and then it, looks at your past test results, and it builds a model and says like, if you touch this part of the code, likely these tests are going to fail, right? I'm highly simplifying it, but like this is what humans do, right? It's like, oh, you check, maybe Harpreet checked the code in and it's in the security area, it's likely that the security tests are going to fail. Like we have that mental model. So what predictive test selection does is it actually takes it at scale. And once you build that model for you, what ends up happening the next time Harpreet checks code in, instead of running test 1 to 5,000, the model will say if you run, 4,000 tests in the order of 4,000, 3,000, 4,999, these are the most likely to fail. So let's run them upfront. And sure enough, Harpreet checks in the code. These three tests get run upfront and they fail. And I can now like not wait a few hours and I got my signal in and I can now, go through and really go fast on my iteration. Like, so that's essentially what we do. And so now you can take this predictive test selection approach and you can start sort of thinking about dynamically building your smoke test, right? It's like, okay, here's the test suite, here's the changes based on the commits. Tell me what tests to run, and these are most likely to fail. So we tell you to run those. And you've essentially moved those tests left without actually, without any human intervention. So you're like smartly moving the test left, you're finding errors faster, you go fix them, the iteration becomes faster. And then at some point in the pipeline, you say, let me run all the tests just to be make sure that we've not missed something. And essentially what you've done is taken the builds that were red on the right hand side and moved them much earlier so that when you finally push the code to production, things are like kosher.
Yeah, in a way, it almost loops back to the first early in the conversation we were talking about one of your clients that you've worked with, where the developer experience was crappy, and they'd get a new developer, and it would take them 6 months to catch
Right.
up. And obviously, your most seasoned developers and testers know, okay, I changed this. I need to do, these tests might fail, and they might manually do that. But
Right.
but that new developer is not going to have a clue,
Yeah.
and of course their supervisor or their manager is going to move on. People change, and you lose that human knowledge. So in a
Mhm.
way, it's also taking the knowledge that some people have
Right.
just from experience and turning
Right.
it into a
Yeah, that's actually a great insight. I didn't think about this earlier, but so for example, like one of the key frustrations in developer experience is like flaky tests, right? It's like these tests that are unreliable, and there's usually human knowledge there. Like some people know, like those tests here in that test suite are flaky. Now, what we can do actually, so this is in beta, but now that we consume your sort of data coming in, we have great insight into like which tests fail, which pass, and which are caused because of like code changes and which are flaky. So we actually produce a report for you that says, here's a flaky test insight. And so we've institutionalized that knowledge, and sorry, we've productized that knowledge. So you can just go to the report, and you don't have to go to dev, the most senior most developer, to go figure out which tests are most flaky, here's your data-driven report that kind of comes to you, right? So that's what we are able to do. And to your point,
Well, what's nice about that is it also backs up, the senior developers who are saying these tests are a waste of time, they're flaky, and people say, well, no, it's your code, you're just trying to make excuses. Like,
right?
well, now we've got actual data to support this as well. It's
Right.
it's not just us.
Exactly.
It supports our gut feeling.
Right. Exactly. And you know what it helps in, like, this brings me to our mission, right? When we started the company, we were quite embarrassed, to be honest, as engineers, that if you've sat in a sales conversation or a marketing conversation, you have exactly all the metrics that tell you like how productive this organization is, and how many days before like you'd close a deal. But if you got on the engineering side and you came in and said like, when is this going to be shipped? And the answer is like, we don't quite know, right? And we felt like as engineers, we should be much more data driven, right? And so part of our thing here was to actually provide this data back to engineers so that they can make the case. This is where we need to invest, right? As a product manager, if a developer comes to me and says like, Harpreet, should I work on this feature or should I work on this flaky test? My answer would be, please go to the feature. I can drive more revenue from there. But if he made a data-driven argument to me and said like, look, this flaky test is actually costing us, you know, uh, 50 hours a week. I'd rather spend, 20 hours fixing this so that we'll get throughput later on. I would immediately sign it, right? So that's another thing that we've been trying to do, is actually provide that data and get people to make really smart decisions.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Is there anything, normally I would say we want to share a little bit about Launchable, but I think we've
done that.
Yeah, we've done that. But if there's anything sort of we haven't discussed, I mean, a lot of it, makes me think back to even years ago when people would build their own Hadoop ecosystems. I remember working with a company.
Right.
They had like 8 people creating this Hadoop platform to measure, to make sense of DevOps data. And now we've obviously got observability platforms and visibility platforms where you're not going to stand up a team to build this huge data lake, because at the end of the day, as you said, it doesn't create revenue. It doesn't change your product. It'll help you be more efficient, but it's a total waste of resources. So I think sort of abstracting all the complexity and delivering it to clients is what a lot of businesses need.
Yeah. So the way this sort of, you touched upon a few points. So one, I think we are building like a developer intelligence platform, right? So predictive test selection is our marquee sort of application. Insights is another one. So if you are a team, you can just connect to us and like we'll start giving you insights, maybe flaky insights. How is your sort of test sessions failures increasing? That means like the code is not quite stable. So we are starting to do that. Forward looking, we are starting to build like a notifications piece out of this data where it should be out in a month or so, where we start telling developers as soon as they push their change in, you have predictive test selection. The test failed in like 30 seconds. We'll just ping you back on Slack and tell you, hey, dude, I'll poke you. Go look at this, right? So that improves their lives. But the bigger point that you made here is like, do we need 8 people to do this? And that was one of our founding principles, where we felt like engineering is always underwater trying to deliver more features. They're working in technical debt, and improving their pipeline is somewhere on that long list of things. So what we wanted to do is make it absolutely turnkey. So what we've done is like, the way you engage with us is when you connect to us, it's essentially a 4-line change to your build pipeline where you start sending data to us. And that probably takes like an hour or two to get that going. We find it's more problematic to find the right people to make the change than do the change. And then, our model learns and it takes a couple of weeks and you're just waiting for the model to learn. And then a couple of weeks later, we come back and we show you a data driven graph that says like, for this particular pipeline, for this particular test suite, here's the lever you could move. Maybe and that's data driven, right? It's like maybe all you need to run is 20% test to get 90% confidence, or maybe 5% test to get 80% confidence. And depending where you're in the pipeline, you can decide how you move the lever. So bringing us in is like pretty much as turnkey as possible. So that's something that I wanted to call out. And the platform, you're not doing anything besides actually connecting your build script to send us some metadata. So we don't ship code to us. So like that's a no-go for us. So we
Okay,
send
yeah,
metadata, and we learn from the metadata from the code.
perfect. Yeah, and I think I don't often encourage people to go to websites, but I think you guys have very clearly describe what you're doing on your website, launchableinc.com. I like it because it's graphical. It makes it really easy to understand. Obviously, there's a lot of technology under the covers. Takes a lot of engineering on your end to make it work.
I'm glad you liked it. Thank you.
Yeah. So any closing remarks before I hand it back to Julio?
Yeah, so for people who are on the call, I think the way to think about this is like if you're trying to uh, figure out how do you get more velocity at similar quality, approaches like machine learning, predictive test selection are sort of on the leading edge of things. So this is probably one of the places to go look at, fairly low cost in terms of time. And that gives you enough time to go in and drive all the other changes you want to do in your organization. So I highly recommend it. I mean, I guess I started a company because I so passionately believed in it. So somewhat of a biased opinion here.
Thanks, Harpreet. Yeah, a little bit biased, but it is sort of a fascinating area because it solves a real business and technology problem. It's not just sort of ML and AI for the sake of raising some investor money. So just want to remind folks that the report is in the handouts tab, and we'll also be sending it. And let me hand the call back over to Julio.
Excellent. So just as a reminder that today's webinar has been recorded, so if you missed any or all of the webinar, you'll be able to watch it again. We'll be sending out an email with the link to access the webinar. You can also find the webinar on devops.com. Just look in the on-demand section, and it should be there. I did mention at the beginning that we were doing a drawing for four $25 Amazon gift cards. So our first winner is Naresh T. Congratulations. Our second winner is Mina S. Our third winner is Gabriel M. And our final winner is Peter S. So congratulations to all of our winners. We'll be reaching out to you via email with instructions for claiming your Amazon gift card. So please check your inbox. And if you don't see it there, check your spam folder. Dan and Harpreet, thank you very much for taking the time to put this presentation together and for giving us part of your day to present. We all appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And finally, I'd like to thank the audience for their time and engagement. This is Julio Godinez signing off until next time. Take care, everyone.